Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And right now we have a Toski Bearer of Secrets aggro deck in mono green. This deck comes to us from Dylan, who has no comments on what they'd like to be improved in the deck, so we're just going to take a general look and see what we can divine from that. As always, the deck list is in the video description below, and I highly recommend you go and take a look. And if you think of anything that can be added to this deck that I don't think of, I would really appreciate it. This deck is kind of tricky for me to work on, so if you have ideas, I'd love to see it. So, who is Toski and why are we using them as a commander? Well, Toski is a 4 mana legendary squirrel. They're a 1/1. The spell cannot be countered, which is really good. The commander is indestructible, which is pretty good. It attacks each combat if able, that's fine. And the important part says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. This one is fantastic. Now, I use Toski in my Hapatra deck because when you have a bunch of snakes, you can just swing them in and draw a bunch of cards. But this one is going to use Toski in the command zone because it wants that ability really, really badly. This is a very aggressive deck with its main kind of game plan is just attacking and attacking some more. So let's see what we can do to improve that. If we come down here and we look at the mana curve, you'll probably notice something that I noticed as well, is that we have a kind of peculiar curve for a deck like this. We start up good in 1 mana, and then we kind of dip in 2, we go back up for 3, and then we kind of peter out to 9, with 9 being the Great Henge, so we don't really count that. So we look at 8 with Craterhoof Behemoth, Kamal, Aziri's Predation, and Praetor Council. That's quite a few 8 drops. 7 drops, there's 3, and 6 drops, there's 3. This is a lot of mana near the end. So what are the things that come to mind immediately looking at this deck? Well, there's an interesting kind of tension. There's actually two interesting tensions, but let's start with the first one. The first interesting tension in this deck is this is a mono green card draw deck. So it does something that's really interesting because green cannot usually draw cards to this reliable way. But what gets me about this is that the mana curve doesn't seem to really, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have the same kind of plan as the commander implies. If you look at the commander decks for other creatures with this kind of power, I think Gix in mono black is like this, and there's another one in blue green, the elf whose name I can't remember, all of which have the text that when you deal damage, you get to draw a card. When you deal damage with a creature, you can draw a card. Granted, they have different caveats on them. The curve often looks really, really different. It kind of looks much higher in the early 1 drops and kind of peters downwards. Because you can imagine when you have, let's say, like when we look at all of these really nice 1 drops, especially the mana dorks and the ones with evasion, every time they hit, you draw a card. It is reasonable for this deck to be drawing upwards of 3 to 4 cards a turn. And the problem is you're not going to be able to cast them all. One of the benefits of having really low mana cards in a deck like this is that you're making the most each turn of the extra cards you draw. You're playing your land drop, you're using whatever mana dorks you haven't attacked with to tap to play more cards, with the goal of kind of reducing your hand size to a manageable level each turn so you aren't just discarding them. Now the problem is with cards such as, Kamal, Craterhoof Behemoth, Old Gnawbone, Hornet Queen, Vigor, all of these here, and then we look at Ziri's Predation, Praetor's Council, Shamanic Revelation, Zendikar Resurgent. If you draw these at the wrong time, you're not gonna be able to cast these cards. And some of these are mana multipliers, and you're still not gonna be, and when you're not able to cast them, you're gonna be even further behind. Taking a turn off to cast Zendikar Resurgent is generally fine. The problem is when you have to then go to discard and lose a bunch of cards. Yeah, next turn you're going to be in a good position, but you spent a lot of mana and didn't really pull your board forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is changing the curve up a bit. The second thing I want to talk about, and this is the thing that I need a little bit of help with because I'm having kind of a hard time myself, is how does this deck win? And I'm not being facetious. I'm trying to picture what that looks like. Because there's a few cards that make me go, okay, I get it. Like Triumph the Hordes, usually with this number of creatures, can, you know, ensure a win. If you can have enough creatures or give them enough creatures with some kind of where is our Bellowing Tangleworm to give them Intimidate, which makes them harder to block, or Trample, which becomes native on Triumph of the Hordes. This can take out 2 to 3 players very easily. Likewise, Crater Hoof Behemoth down here represents an absurd amount of damage all at once, provided that you have a large enough board. Okay, I'm all for these. I like those. But outside of those cards, being in mono green, it's particularly difficult to find Triumph of the Hordes. Whereas we have Worldly Tutor at least here in order to grab Craterhoof Behemoth. Otherwise, we're kind of at a situation where it's tough to get to our finisher, and if our finisher gets countered, we're kind of out of the game. Now, I don't think this is the worst thing. I think this is perfectly fine. A deck at this power level doesn't necessarily need to be able to win every game, especially with this with the same strategy. But I'm going to suggest that it's going to be a little tricky if we don't build around ways to gain Craterhoof Behemoth. Yesterday I was talking about a lot of blink decks. And one of the things with the blink decks that I had been building without black is that they were lacking meaningful tutors or meaningful ways to dig down to grab the cards you needed. And when I played it last, I was in a scenario that over the course of one turn, I would draw at least 3 to 4 cards. And I had several turns like this. And I was just going nowhere. I was in a commanding position, but I was vulnerable to board clears, which I was lucky that they didn't happen. But there was nothing going on. I only was able to dig for the answer that I need after drawing 26 cards in one turn. That's the kind of idea that I want to put in your heads here. It is really great to be drawing 4 or 5 cards a turn, but if you're looking for a specific pair of cards or specific cards, such as, once again, Triumph of the Hordes or Craterhoof Behemoth, drawing cards isn't going to be enough. That is you need to draw a really high amount of those cards, and only then will you be able to grab it. And even then, because of how Toski works, you actually won't be able to cast it until next turn, because you have had to have already attacked for it to have access to Cultivator Colossus, my goodness, Craterhoof Behemoth. So there's a bit of a tension there. And the first thing that immediately I think of just to alleviate that tension is Fierce Empath. Fierce Empath will immediately grab your Cultivator Colossus without being an expensive card or a big tutor that you have to think about. It's kind of like Worldly Tutor, but only grabs the best card in your deck. And I think that's great. I think that's fine. If you also are playing both, where is it? Eternal Witness, you're not playing Timeless Witness. I believe that's the other one. I believe you can play Timeless Witness as well, just as another return target card. And there's also the Snake that does that as well. Return target card. And then it has, I believe, Death Touch, but I think this is enough. Skullwinder. Skullwinder should be another one that you're playing if you are not playing already, because you have only so many win conditions, and if they get countered or they go into the graveyard, you need to be able to pick them back up. In fact, the fact that all of these cards also will rebuy your tutors, like Worldly Tutor, is really good. So I recommend you grab them. If you're not familiar with Skullwinder, don't worry too much that it returns a card for one of your opponents too. It is common to have one opponent who just doesn't have anything good to grab, or you can help someone pick up removal to use on something else. So, what other things am I going to suggest to help these two plans kind of come together? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is we need to increase the low mana drops. And I think nice and easy, you should play every mana dork that is available. I don't know if there's a search for just mana dorks. Um, let's see. Let's start with just a simple 1 mana green creature with tap ability. Don't think you can go wrong there. So, outside of things without power, because we need to actually deal damage, almost everything in here that taps for mana. Arbor Elf, Boreal Druid. Let's go down. Elvish Mystic. Even Elvish Reclaimer is playable. Finehorn Elves. Gingerbrute should definitely be played here. Um, Llanowar Elves. Even Loam Dryad is fine. But almost every single playable 1 mana creature that taps for mana, or can tap for mana, well, not this one, it's Defender, should definitely be in the deck. One of your goals is to get Toski out as fast as possible, and so having as many mana creatures will help this. Now, it's kind of difficult for you to play it on turn 2. I think this is a turn 3 commander, and I think that's fine. Having a bunch of 1-drops really helps, and then probably do the same thing at 2 drops. Oops. Let's see. I know there's some, let's see. Elf, nope, that's 0, so let's not worry about that. Fauna Shaman, I think, is definitely playable if you're not playing it already. Gyro Sage is fine. Uh, Elysian Kartide is fine. Incubation Druid doesn't have any attack. But same thing here, like Leaf Glider, it's a 2/1 for 2, it's fine. We're going to play every single one of these that can tap for mana. Now, the other reason we're doing these for 2 reasons. The first half is that all of these creatures will power out Toski, and then each of these creatures will draw you cards after the fact. But we want another kind of effect, and I wonder how many of these we can find. And what I'm talking about is Copperhorn Scout effects. Now you'll notice Copperhorn Scout has a very specific ability that when Copperhorn Scout attacks, you untap your team. This, I think, is probably, I'm hoping we can find a lot of cards like this. This is the dream because it allows your deck to do something really, really powerful. And what that is you play a bunch of creatures that make mana or use other cards to make those creatures make mana, which we'll get to in a second. Saga green. You have creatures that either make mana or creatures that can be made to make mana. You attack with them to draw cards, and then you untap them. Hopefully, they all get through, and you don't lose too many creatures. And then you draw that many cards. Let's say one of your opponents just doesn't have creatures. You attack with like 3/1/1s in Toski. You draw 4 cards. You had attacked with a Copperhorn Scout that untaps all of your mana dorks, all your other creatures. You draw those cards, and now you have access to the extra mana from your creatures in addition to the extra cards they provided. And then you've got, you know, you've got a machine working now. All of a sudden, every turn you can build more and more of a board, creating a wider and wider situation that's more and more complex, that taps for more and more mana, and that also enables you to, you know, just go further, deeper into your deck. I think this is the best direction to do it. So let's start with one of those things that we need is we're going to see what untap creatures. We're going to see in mono green what we have as a reasonable kind of card here. One of the things that's kind of tricky is when we're in one color, we only have so many options available to us. And so far, it's not looking too good. Tap all lands. Sword. A Parns. This could be used. This is something worth considering. Where is... Don't we have a very powerful card? Maybe I have the wrong text here. Let's keep that one as well. Untap. Let's try untap permanents. Because Seedborn Muse was the one I'm thinking about, and I'm assuming that you are playing Seedborn. You are not playing Seedborn Muse. I think you should be playing Seedborn Muse. Now, this is only at end of turn, but it allows you to gain a little bit of mana there. Let's see. Is Paradox Engine legal in... No, it's banned in Commander. Okay, fine. Curse of Bounty is definitely should be here because it does the same thing as Copperhorn Scout, but just a little easier because it can't be removed as well. And let's see. The options are lower than I thought. Now let's look at another way of doing this, and let's look in green. Creatures gain vigilance. Let's go by mana value. Song of Freyalise was the card I was going to show anyway, so this is a great time to show it. The Song of Freyalise doubles up by making all your creatures tap for mana, and also giving them a small kind of overrun effect at the end, including Vigilance, which works really well here. Let's see. God Eternal Ronas is interesting here. I don't think you are playing it, because it gives Vigilance across the board. Let's see if there's any others. The rest are very high mana. Endrace Forerunners I think is fine, but gain trample. Oh, she has vigilance. Okay, that doesn't really do much for us. So we don't have that many options once again, but Storm the Seed Core, God Eternal Ronas, and Song of Freyalise, all of these kind of are they pull my attention. I think probably you're going to end up with 5 to 6 or 7 cards that untap your entire team. These are definitely things that you should be considering in order to go further. Sword of the Parans is interesting because if you're able to have a creature that taps for enough mana, you have infinite mana. I'm looking specifically at Circle of the Dreams Druid, but it can also be just really useful to untap or tap on certain creatures. But I think honestly you're only playing this for the infinite combo, so I'll let you decide that. And then Patron of the Orochi is interesting. I don't know if you play enough snakes for this to be good, but the fact that you can use this to untap your entire board, including your mana, is really, really cool, and I think worth considering as a card. The next one I'm thinking of is Can't Be Blocked. Oops. Once again in green. You have a few cards like this, but I wonder if there's a few that are more in artifacts. I think there's Glaring Spotlight really catches my eye because for 3 mana, you basically you make all of your creatures unblockable for the turn. I think that's really strong here, both to finish off players but also draw a bunch of cards. Graz is interesting. I didn't think of Graz, but Graz is a creature-based kind of overrun effect that turns all your creatures into 5/3s and stops. Now, walls don't really matter, but it is interesting that it can power up all your mana dorks. And because it changes their base power and toughness, it doesn't remove bonuses that you might get from +1/+1 counters or like from Craterhoof Behemoth. I think that's particularly strong. Cards like Key to the City, Manifold Key, I think those are fine, but I wouldn't have minded just an across the board creatures can't be blocked. Are you playing Questing Beast? Questing Beast might work like that, but now I'm also thinking of the other side. I think you already have it. Oh, you don't. The battle. Let's go green battle. Let's see. I forget which one. Invasion of Ikoria. Invasion of Ikoria is also interesting because on its flip side, it gives all your non-humans the ability to assign damage as if they weren't blocked. and also benefits of having a low casting cost on the other side. Now, 6 damage is a lot, and unfortunately, that 6 damage will not be triggered by Toski because you need to deal damage, or will not trigger Toski because you need the damage. But it is a card that you could play reasonably in a card like this, in a deck like this. Those are my initial thoughts. I Yeah, it's kind of a hard deck for me to take a look at because I feel like it's trying to do something that is very, very direct and fair that has a lot of pressure on the mana base and the creatures. And I think if you alleviate that pressure by dramatically reducing the overall curve and putting it front loaded, so you can guarantee having your mana dorks, your low mana creatures, so you can guarantee those first few draws off of Toski, you're going to be in a really, really strong position. And I think the deck is going to come together really, really quickly because you're just going to get very, very far ahead, and it's just going to be impossible to bring you back. Especially with cards like Heroic Intervention and the like that can basically protect your board for a turn and keep you out of board clear range, which is something that's important to consider. All right, I'm going to just do a quick peek of anything else I've missed. Bear Umbra. I should have also looked at that, I think, untapping all lands, but I think it's not as important as untapping all creatures. I think a lot of these like Beastmaster Ascension deck cards and Druid Repository are very, very good here, and I really like their inclusion. I think they work very well as a backup plan when you don't have Toski, in the same way that I enjoy the inclusion of cards like Oran Frostfang and Oran Frostfang and what was the other one? I forget what the other one's called. There's another one that when you hit, you draw cards, but very, very strong cards. And I think the ones I want to remove are cards like Deep Forest Hermit, Deranged Hermit. I know they represent, and Hornet Queen even. I know they represent a lot of bodies on the field, which enable you to be able to uh, draw many, many more cards and make Triumph much, much better. Triumph of the Hordes. It's just I don't think it's where you want to be to tap out further. And with that in mind, you're also going to be behind because you have a temporary creature. Yeah, they boost Toski, and maybe that's the reason they're there. But I think they're competing in the mana slot because it's just too high mana. I wouldn't mind it if we could probably get something like the reductions would have to be somewhere else then, right? And these ones they crowd up your 5 mana slot, and I don't think they beat or on Frostfang or Tendershoot Dryad. Definitely probably beat Nut Collector. Once again, I do understand that it's a very fun card and with squirrels, but these are really I don't even understand why they're so high mana. I think these cards are fine to just play as a 3 mana card with less squirrels, but for some reason they made them to be very, very high mana creatures. Um, hmm. Anything else I want to speak on? There was a card in mind, and it's just erased itself from my brain. Other commander creatures and other creatures. This one's very good as well. Yeah, at the moment I can't particularly think of it. But oh yes, of course, I remember now. I think you'd be very, very happy to gain creatures haste. To be able to give haste to all of your creatures, I'm looking at Concordant Crossroads and Crashing Drawbridges here. I think you would just very much so benefit by having access to those cards because the ability to play creatures and go and attack with them right away to increase your numbers, or even be able to attack with Toski right away is really, really nice. Concordant Crossroads is also very attractive because it kind of incentivizes your opponents to attack more because now all their creatures have haste. And with that in mind, you have better attacks yourself in order to draw more cards. I am notice. Oh, okay. Decimator only gives haste to itself. It doesn't give haste across the board. So I'm not going to say much about that. But I think those are the ones I would say to consider heavily because especially Crossing Drawbridge, it's like 30, like about $1 sometimes. I think that's a very, very strong card. All right, I hope this helped. Tuski's kind of a tricky commander. I think it's definitely a powerful commander and a powerful effect. And I think you can build a very fun steamroller, deck, like a deck that once it gets going, it's really, really hard to stop. And once you fix up the kind of mana curve so it gets going faster and more reliably, you're going to find that it's even harder for your opponents to stop this deck. As always, if you have another draft of the deck, I would love to see it. Or if you have any draft of any other deck, I'd love to see that too. There is a form in the video description that you can write up, and I can take a look at this deck or any other deck. And as always, it would be very helpful if you did the like, comment, subscribe YouTube thing. Our channel is growing, and it's very helpful for you, for the channel, and for people who need their decks helped if we can grow the channel. All right. Thank you very much, and I wish you luck in building Toski.